Hello everybody, this is Serpent Gear, and this is my first ever recording on my channel. Today I'm going to be playing on my 1.16 survival Minecraft world. So far everything has been implemented except for phantoms because I hate phantoms. And I don't really have a plan today. I think I'm just going to ramble. So I will do that as I work on my lovely house behind me. As you can see, it's not done yet. And I've decided that I am going to ramble about a bunch of things that I'm very fond of. And if you're interested in them, okay, that's great. If not, well, okay, you can go watch someone else if you want. Let me just, you can never have enough crafting tables. No. The first topic I've decided that I'm going to talk about is carnivorous plants, because those are one of my favorite things to talk about. Alright, so, and I'm going to be mining in the nether when I'm talking about this, so that's going to be extra interesting. Alright, so, talking about carnivorous plants. The first thing that we can talk about with carnivorous plants that's the most familiar, you've probably heard of Venus flytraps. Venus flytraps are a unique species. I'm probably going to butcher the Latin. Dionea muscipoa. Probably said that wrong. Oh well. I'm not a professional, but I'm a very enthusiastic hobbyist. Alright, so Venus flytraps, they're extremely popular and they're very unique. They're native to the Carolinas in North America, and they are most known for being a plant that has rapid movement, that it can be tracked with the eye. And they are known for being carnivorous, as they use this movement to catch prey. They lure insects and catch them. So the interesting thing about Venus flytraps, I'm going to talk a bit about the mechanisms they use to catch prey, and then some interesting information for people who might have thought, I want to grow one, but I don't know a whole lot about them, because I think that would be useful. Alright, so the first thing, Venus flytraps are a species that goes dormant in winter. They require cold temperatures during part of the year, and a little during or after October is when they start to enter dormancy. This is notable because while there are many companies out there that sell Venus flytraps, and they are legitimate companies, they aren't shady in any form or fashion. They will begin selling these plants around October, and this is near their dormancy period. There are many people who will actually do everything right with these plants when they handle them, but because the plants are getting ready to go dormant when they first purchase them, they don't realize that when the plant becomes dormant or begins showing signs of dormancy, that it is actually a normal phenomenon. I'm going to get lost because I'm talking and I don't know how to talk and move around at the same time, apparently. Okay, now I know where I'm going. Venus flytraps will begin showing signs of dormancy by first of all showing less reaction. They will not react to being touched, or they will react much slower. And the larger traps of the plant will begin to die down until it's a small rosette. It will stay in this rosette throughout winter until spring, when it will begin to become more active. It won't be dormant anymore. So the notable thing about this is that a lot of these are sold near dormancy. So for those of you who want to grow a carnivorous plant, don't think automatically that you're doing something wrong if it's just not acting normal. If you've been taking care of it and it starts, acting sickly or dying off. Ooh, why did I do that? The Venus flytraps are probably fine if dormancy is the only thing you're worried about. It's hard to think with that going on. Okay. The next thing I should probably say, before I jump into another pool, is Venus flytraps are actually harmed by being triggered a bunch of times if there is no prey to be found in the traps. So the reason I say this, it's okay if you want to look at the reaction time like every once in a while, but an important thing I should note is while it is fun to watch these plants react because of their instant movement, if they do not have a prey item in their traps when you trigger them, you are causing an energy loss to that plant. Rapid movement is very rare for plants because it is an expensive strategy. It is very difficult for plants to justify rapid movement because of how much energy it takes to do so. They only get their energy from sunlight and such, so it is very important to acknowledge that these plants do not have a whole lot of energy to spare. Am I making you nervous yet with my movement? I bet I am. I bet I am. Alright, I'm trying to get up there. And not doing a good job of it. These plants need to have prey in them when you trigger them, and it's important to note that no more than 2 traps ideally should be triggered by a person intentionally at any given time on a plant. This is a rule of thumb. It's not necessarily a rule you have to follow, but if you're wanting to grow them, I would highly suggest following it because you don't want to kill your plant. Sometimes it's very expensive to get Venus flytraps, and I wouldn't want you to kill one by mistake. Actually, no, I wouldn't want you to kill one in general just because I really like these plants and I want them to be happy and well taken care of. So those are Venus flytraps. The way they work, they have larger hairs on the exterior that look like teeth, and they have smaller hairs that work for sensing things on the interior. What makes these triggers so sophisticated is not only do 2 of these trigger hairs have to be set off in order for the trap to go off, but additionally, the plant has a mechanism in place for if it catches something other than actual prey. Because what happens is the plant will close, and if it has prey in it, it will proceed to fill the trap with something to digest that prey, and that is an entire process that can be very expensive if it's done with no gain. So, these hairs on the interior of the trap do not just work for catching prey, but they also detect if the prey is actually alive or moving. The trap will close loosely at first, and generally the hairs are enough, the ones on the exterior, they're enough to keep something from getting out. But how does the trap know to close tightly and seal and begin digestion? The little hairs on the interior of the trap will sense if a prey is struggling and will tell the trap to tighten if that prey continues to struggle. And this is notable because if you supplement your Venus flytraps with something that is not necessarily a live insect, then you need to trick the trap into thinking that its prey is alive. I use slightly rehydrated bloodworms, like what you would get at a pet store for fish. I feed these to the traps, and then I squeeze the traps a few times, and I do come back usually maybe 5 or 10 minutes later to make sure that the trap actually closed and registered that the plant, I need to make sure it actually was fooled into thinking that it had a prey item. So that's a thing that's interesting there. And hopefully that's enough for you to kind of figure out Venus flytraps. If you ever want to get one, it's important to note that they are bog plants. They not only despise high nutrient soils and fertilizer, but they also will not do well if you do not give them constant moisture. They grow in a bog. So that's Venus flytraps. Now we're going to talk about other carnivorous plants, which these are ones that you might have not heard of before. I hope I don't dig into lava. The next one on the list, North American pitcher plants. Some of these can grow in the same type of environment as Venus flytraps. Most of them do. So if you can realistically grow them next to each other, although I don't always recommend that, as Venus flytraps are plants that do not get very tall and they need full sun, so pitcher plants tend to shade them, and that's not very good. North American pitcher plants are called trumpet pitchers, and there's many different species, and they grow mostly throughout the United States, mostly in the deep south, but a few species can grow all the way up north as far as Canada. They're scientific name is Sarracenia, and they rely on a pitfall trap strategy. They do not have instant movement, but they have these very interesting trumpet-shaped pitchers, as the name would suggest, and they have a hood. The hood on the pitcher keeps rainwater from diluting things too much, and it can also act a little bit as a lure. The hood has nectar on it, and it has a rim that insects will perch on. As insects come to the pitcher, they will be attracted to the nectar. They will eat the nectar and go into the pitcher and then proceed to drown in the pitfall trap. And some other interesting tricks that these pitchers use to lure prey. A small number of them have transparent windows and a hooded shape. These transparent windows confuse insects as they wander in and then cannot find their way back out of the pitcher plant. Other tricks can include a nectar that is laced with a weak narcotic. The narcotic is enough to disorient insects and make them fly in an irregular fashion. And this is all for the sake of making sure that it doesn't get away. These plants, like Venus flytraps, will go dormant in winter, and they grow in a bog environment. As I said, they grow in the same environment. So they like full sun, and they like having water. That is important. You should not fertilize these plants. You should not give them nutrient-rich soil. All of these are bad ideas for carnivorous plants in general. So next on the list, and another North American species, Darlingtonia, which is the cobra lily, or possibly the California pitcher plant. These plants are unique because they are shaped an awful lot like a snake. They have a hooded shape, and they even have a little leaf-like flap that looks like a tongue. It's fork-shaped. These plants are considered harder to grow. I remember when I was a child somehow getting my hands on one that was a clone. I don't know why it was being sold commonly in stores. You can't find them today for some reason. Darlingtonia grows generally around springs, and as a result, these plants tend to prefer very cold roots. In fact, a common strategy for growing these is to pour refrigerated water over the plant every day. So that's an interesting thing to think about because, you know, cold and plants, you wouldn't think that would be a combination, but apparently it is. Otherwise, I can't say much about these plants. They tend to grow very similarly to typical North American pitcher plants. They rely on transparent windows to trick their prey into a maze. And that's what I can say about Darlingtonia. All right, another one that's a little less common, and probably the last of things that I would say is restricted to the New World on the western hemisphere of the planet, is Heliumphora. Now, there's people who call them sun pitchers because of the Latin name Helios. I don't remember exactly the correct name, but it's not Helios that they have their name taken from. Heliumphora is actually more properly referred to as a marsh pitcher, and it is more common in places such as Venezuela and the Tepuy Mountains. I'm pretty sure I butchered that. These plants have only recently been discovered. There are still new species being discovered to this day, and they are unique. They are considered a primitive version of a pitcher plant, similar to the North American pitcher plants. They grow in environments that have extremely intense light but are at an extremely high altitude. And this makes it unique as there's constant humidity and constant bright sunlight. These plants may or may not have a certain tolerance to cool temperatures. In fact, most of them will die in warmer temperatures. Something about a type of fungus. There's still people learning about them to this day because they are so new. They have a little nectar spoon and basically resemble a rolled up leaf. Some of these species are more like early carnivorous plants, as only a handful of them actually produce digestive enzymes. Many of these pitcher plants actually digest their prey more through the use of bacteria. I kept one for a few years but failed to reproduce it, and after a while it began to die. I had it for about 2 or 3 years, and it bloomed multiple times in my care. I can attest to the bacterial colony being what it relies on, as when I was taking really good care of it and it was in good health, it It wasn't constant, and you didn't have to be, you had to be right on top of it, but it did have a bit of a odor because bacteria. It wasn't, it was kind of like a latrine a little bit, if I'm completely honest. That sounds unappealing. You don't notice it unless your nose is right on top of it and unless it's been well fed. So that's an interesting thing there. Some of them do produce these digestive enzymes. A few of them do not and are entirely reliant on the bacteria. So these are considered primitive plants. They're notable because their growing conditions are a bit difficult to replicate. It's only through the use of LEDs that I can say they became truly common. Fluorescent lights were originally not just very energy intensive, but too warm to grow these plants. But they're extremely beautiful, if you want my honest opinion. They just have all these pretty colors. They're gorgeous, and their flowers make me think of orchids, if I'm honest. Although if you're an orchid girl, you're probably like, that's not an orchid. I don't care. It's pretty. So that's all the things that I can think of that grow exclusively in the Western Hemisphere. And I'm going to get a drink of water because my throat is killing me. Much better. Next up, these grow on both hemispheres, sundews. These are known as droseras, and they're actually considered by some scientists to maybe be what the Venus flytrap evolved from. They have leaves that are covered in sticky dew, and an insect will be attracted to this dew and they will get stuck, and then it's basically living flypaper is what it is. Sundews will catch prey and then slowly curl over the prey and digest it. People believe that Venus flytraps evolved from a strategy like this. They believed that the reaction time curling over the insect over time grew faster and faster until the plant had near instant movement. I want to go up there, but I'm scared of lava. Gotta find my way up there. Let's see, what else can I talk about? It's worthwhile for me to get a ton of blackstone. It just is. I go through it quite a lot, so it warrants my effort. Let's see, what else can I say? I know I'm using dirt in the nether, but so far I haven't been ambushed by any ghasts. Let's see. Oh yeah. Okay, after sundews. After sundews, we have butterworts. Butterworts use the same strategy as sundews, but they look a little less strange. They don't look dewy. They really do look kind of like little tiny plants. They have some pretty cute flowers. People are very fond of them just for their flowers. And they do the same sort of thing as a sundew. They have a flypaper strategy, so to speak. So those are sundews. I don't grow sundews or butterworts as they're not my primary hobby plant, but I know a lot of people who adore them a great deal. Let's see. What else can I say? Bladderworts. Bladderworts are an aquatic carnivorous plant. These plants are unique. They have little bladders attached to their roots. And what these have, they have trigger hairs, and when something like a prey item is present, the bladder trap will open, and then the prey will get sucked in like a vacuum. So they have little air pockets. So that's another thing. I don't know how to grow these, as they tend to be either very tiny or I can't find good resources for them. But that's another one. So how many have I listed so far? We've got Darlingtonia, Heliumphora, Sarracenia, Dionea. We've got bladderworts and butterworts and sundews. I might have already said that. Let's see, what else am I missing? I know I'm probably missing something. Right? Oh yeah, there is one more. I don't know a whole lot about it. Actually, no, there's a couple more. Corkscrew plants. These plants are apparently aquatic carnivorous plants. They're a little bit like bladderworts. I don't know a whole lot about them. Carnivorous bromeliads. They grow in the same place as helianthora. They do not presumably have digestive enzymes. They have highly reflective interiors and lure in insects which drown in their centers. They are like the bromeliads you're thinking of that get sold in stores. They have that center and they drown things. Ever since I accidentally did this making another portal, I've realized it's actually super useful. Wow, my music is loud. After bromeliads that are carnivorous, you have cephalotus. These are the Australian pitcher plant. They resemble slippers, and let me mute this music because I can't think straight with it going on. There we go. You can hear the desolate sounds of the nether now. Desolate, you know? There we go. All the lava is gone. Yeah, I kind of tapered off at the end there, didn't I? So those are the carnivorous plants, and I enjoy growing them. I have a lot of Nepenthes, and we do keep in our backyard a few bog gardens that have the North American pitcher plants and the Venus flytraps. So those are carnivorous plants, and that's me rambling for a pretty decent amount of time about carnivorous plants. So now I'm probably going to slow down because I probably just gave you a massive info dump and you're probably feeling tired just thinking about it maybe, because that was probably a mild hobbyist lecture. And I'm not an expert, okay? I'm not gonna lie. I'm not an expert on these topics. I'm just a person who has studied this stuff a great deal because I'm fond of it. So after carnivorous plants, what else could I talk about? I guess art would be next. I am an artist in my spare time, and I'm not saying that like, oh, I'm an artist, I dabble. I am a serious artist. I have done commissions, and I have gotten into galleries. Well, one gallery. I'm not going to exaggerate and lie. I've only been in the one gallery, and it's not that big, but that's still something notable, right? Okay, so there's that. I am a traditional artist. I can do digital art, but I do not like tablets. I know a lot of people feel spoiled with them, and I'm glad that you enjoy your tablets. It's just I really personally don't like the tablet I got. Maybe if it was a different tablet, I'd be happy with it, but for me, it's a frustrating thing that I can't get used to, even though I've tried to in the past. So what I can talk about with art is when I do it in a professional way or even just as a hobby, I've worked with a bunch of different mediums. I know how to do pen and inks, and I know how to do paintings and that sort of deal. I've even done a few other things like certain forms of printmaking and sculpting. But I don't do a whole lot of sculpting because I generally don't have the resources to do things like that. Or the strength, because sometimes it takes a decent amount of strength to do certain forms of things like carving and such. So what I can tell you about my artwork. A lot of people sometimes think, okay, the colors in my work never look good, or why does this fade so fast? There's actually a term for this. People would call it light fast. And how long something lasts as far as light fast value, that's referring to how quickly it takes for a color to fade. And examples of this would be things like yellow pigment turning to a cream color over time, black turning gray, blue turning violet, or just being less vibrant over time. And there's definitely things you've probably heard of, strategies for negating this. You've probably heard people tell you, don't put your stuff in direct sunlight. If you're going to have an art piece, make sure you frame it behind UV resistant glass. That's good advice. I will tell you now it is. But light fast value is also impacted by the materials you use. Generally, you want something that is acid-free if you are doing your art and you want it to last. You want the medium to be acid-free. And if you get something where you want the piece to last for years and years, you want it to outlive you potentially as long as it's taken care of, you want to get pigments that have light fast values that are very high. And unfortunately, you're going to find that with a lot of artwork, you tend to get what you pay for. I personally had to, most of my expenses that are hobby related are actually art supplies because I pay more to get nicer stuff. And I don't feel guilty about that at all because I definitely notice the difference. It's not just that things don't fade as quickly, but generally more expensive paints are more expensive because they have more pigment in them. And you can tell the difference. Your reds look more vibrant. Your blues are brighter. The whites are, they look more brilliant. They don't look grayish when you compare them to other things. And the blacks are darker. So that's something that actually does matter to me a lot. And sometimes people prefer it just because of the brighter colors. The light fast value, though, is something that you should be familiar with if you're an artist who wants to be professional. If you want to give people something that will last over time. And it's also something that I would tell you as I do collect art from other people. It's something that I pay close attention to. I am actually very picky about the stuff that I choose to spend money on, what I frame out and put on my wall as decoration. And I have been known to like an art piece and reject it if I know what materials it's made from and I find that the materials will not last a long time. So an example of this are certain types of plant-based dyes or pigments. People can definitely pick the dyes that last longer, but if I know for a fact that something will fade after a year, even if it's put behind protective glass, I will not purchase it because I want something that's going to last a really long time. I'm very fussy about that. And that's what I can tell you about art from the get-go. Art is, that's something that I take very seriously. I think I got enough blackstone, don't you? Yeah, we got enough. We got enough. I'm kind of running out of scaffolding stuff here anyway. So, after light fast value, what I could tell you about pigments. Pigments, until we got certain types of artificial, I'm out of food as well. I'm going to go to the river and kill some fish. I don't fish normally. I go in with a sword. You know the deal. I remember a bunch of salmon spawning in this river. Yeah. There they are. There they are. Well, okay, so where was I? Right. The fun thing about pigments was there's this long history behind them that people don't know about. Before we got all of these synthetic pigments, people used to have this really crazy market surrounding pigments because people would have to go through great lengths to get certain colors. Artists were generally fussy about what pigments they used. They would keep things a secret. You would pay a ton of money for a specific shade of brown. But you would not believe some of the stuff that got made into pigment. There was a pigment that was sold under some scientific name, but it was also called mummy brown by the people who were more honest. It was actually a pigment taken from things like Egyptian mummies, and then that's actually an interesting thing on its own, as people started running out of mummies. So what they did is they started raiding graves and that sort of deal, which arguably that's way worse if you think about it. Like, not only are you desecrating historical artifacts, but you're also raiding graves for pigment. There's some stories that evolve from that, which some of them are along the lines of an artist who, upon finding out, because not everybody knew what the origins of this pigment were, some of them probably didn't know that it was actually, I might as well go get this bone meal, right? And then cook this food before I run out of sprint in the middle of the night when something could come and kill me. There was an artist who, upon finding out that his pigment was derived from something of human remains, he apparently held a ceremony and buried the pigment in his yard. Which, it's kind of comedic and also very dark. I hope this isn't too morbid for you, whoever it is that's watching this. So that's a thing. There's other things too. There's purple pigments, which were derived from crushed snails. There's other things too, like lapis lazuli, which you know probably from Minecraft. That is a mineral. It's very interesting because there's a story behind this pigment. They actually discovered that women had a role in doing archival work in places like monasteries or whatever was, the seat of religious power, I guess, back in the day, because they found lapis lazuli pigment in the skulls of some of these women. They were probably fidgeting while they were working, and they got a little bit of the pigment in their teeth, and they never got it out of their teeth. So that's an interesting story. Lapis lazuli was very expensive because it was a mineral-derived pigment. And the snail pigment, that purple, was extremely expensive. That's probably a reason why you've probably noticed that a lot of royals wear purple. The reason for that is it was very expensive, and that was a thing related to class. Another drink of water here. So just imagine, like, you get the convenience of all these really bright colors, and maybe some of them are a little more expensive. But imagine how much some of the colors you have now at your disposal for maybe like $10. Imagine how much people would have paid back in the day when they were just, like some artists that, hey, this guy ventured all the way across the sea just to get you this one really beautiful vial of pigment that you can barely fit onto one painting, and it's not even a big painting. Just imagine how crazy that was and how different things are now. I'm gonna have to find it. Oh, goodness gracious. Hello? Die. I don't know why that startled me so bad. It just did. I know there's cows around here somewhere, so let me go find them. Because I know that there's some villages around, and I really do not need this bad omen thing because it creeps me out just staring at that little icon in the corner. There's a cow, way over there. There we go. There we go, no harm done. Alright, so after the pigment thing. The different printmaking techniques. Now, an interesting thing, sometimes people think, oh, because it's a print, it's not valuable, right? I should probably mention this here, but sometimes the print can be valuable. Sometimes the print is the end goal. If you're a person who's ever heard of woodcut prints or linocut prints, these are done by carving wood or linoleum blocks. And effectively, these printmaking techniques are stamps. A person who hand carves linoleum and wooden stamps, it is an art form. And while it is a printmaking technique and there may be more than one print, and if an artist chooses to limit the number of prints they make, then it's valuable. And also, the lifespan of certain blocks is very limited. Linoleum blocks can slowly fall apart over time to the point that they are no longer usable. And, you know, sometimes things can happen to wood. I think the wood's probably longer lasting. It's important to know this because printmaking does not necessarily mean that the print is not valuable. I would argue that choosing to limit them makes them valuable, but there is something to be said for a person hand carving a stamp for hours, possibly days or weeks. You know, some people can get very, very complex. The interesting thing about printmaking, the other one is screen printing. Screen printing, you have a screen. It's you know, it's very thin and things can pass through it. You put an image on the screen and selectively block the image. Okay, so you fill in the screen where you don't want ink to go, and then things can pass through where you want things to go. The screen, you have to have a different one for every color you use. So the more colors you have, the more expensive a print will be. This holds true for linocut blocks and screen printing. So generally you will see a lot of them being printed in one color, and you will find the price goes up if you're buying artwork for anything that has more than one color. The interesting case of this that I should mention, there's something called a reduction linocut. This is called the suicide printmaking method. The reason for this is a reduction linocut is using the same block with different iterations of carving. An artist will carve the block one time, they'll stamp a color, they'll carve it a bit more, and then stamp in a different color to create the image. Because the block, it's the same block every time the image is carved, the block is destroyed over time. That means however many prints that artist starts making from the beginning, that is the only prints they are going to be able to make because they have destroyed the block. It is impossible to make another print of that block. So that's a bit about printmaking there. And screen printing is a very common thing. You might have seen it being used to make posters, but there's also people who do it for shirts, okay? Screen printing is a very nice thing. I'm personally not a huge fan because it takes me forever to prepare screens, and I'm not primarily a printmaker. I'm more of a painter and a drawer. But I believe that people would find this information interesting. And that's all that I can talk about with art. And I believe that I went and mined all that blackstone, and I'm actually looking for a warped forest, not actually... No, I was actually going to work on some more aspects of the roof. You can tell that I just go crazy with blackstone, can't you? You'll see what I'm doing. My house tends to look a little bit like a porcupine with the end design I have in mind. And I'll have a lot of spare stairs. Don't you worry. It's going to look really interesting by the time I'm done. At least I think it looks interesting, but that's what matters, right? It's my house, right? I'm going to have to find a warped forest, too. Of course, my nether portal had to be so close to Blackstone. Maybe I need to just make another portal. Maybe that would be easier. Who knows? I mean, I have access to all that lava. It's hard to think here. Okay. So, with art discussions out of the way, some things I've personally learned about artwork. Some of the best markers out there that you can purchase are an alcohol-based marker called Copics for Copics. People seem to be debating still which one you use. I call them Copics, but I've heard people use the other variation of the name. Copics tend to have a wide variety of color selections. They have reusable markers, so when the marker dries out or it runs out of ink, you can refill them. And there's a set number of refills for them, but that's something you can do. The only downside I can say with these markers, in spite of their wide selection of availability, as well as their pigment selection, is that these markers, first of all, they're expensive. You can pay almost like $8 for one marker, and you can expect probably $1,000 or more if you're buying a full set. Was getting a drink of water. If I go silent, I'm probably drinking water. In addition to the price, this is something that I don't think people have been able to explain super well, although people have their theories. An ink flood. This is extremely rare, I think, in winter, so I would say there's a bit of credibility to the theory, I guess, that people had. Basically, sometimes the marker will just bleed ink all over your work that you're dealing with, which is extremely awful because it can just ruin whatever you're working on. Someone somewhere that I read, and they're not a professional, we don't actually know the cause of this, but I do think it's important to point it out, said, okay, we think it might have something to do with temperature, why the ink just suddenly comes out of the marker like that. It was really awful the first time it happened to me. I wasn't working on anything important, but it was a red marker, and when I started dabbing up the marker to try to, get it back to a normal volume of ink, it did look like someone had been bleeding. It was just the right color for that, So that is something I want to point out because I feel like that's an important warning to give. Like, they're extremely good markers. That hasn't stopped me from buying them and using them because it's so rare. I'm just mentioning it because I feel like people would be very upset if no one warned them about that, as much money as a marker can cost. Second to Copic markers are Prismacolor. They're less expensive, but they also have less selections available in colors. But they also don't appear to have that ink issue. And those are the colors that I primarily use. An interesting thing, I bought a set of them before inflation took over, apparently. And it was still expensive, but the set that I have now is worth a lot more currently than it was back when it was purchased. And it was on sale too, and apparently sales like that now are unheard of. So I primarily use Prismacolor with Copics for certain pigments that I can't find in Prismacolor. When I suggest getting Prismacolor markers, I suggest getting the bright primary colors and intermediate shades that a cheaper market set might not have. Alcohol ink is extremely nice in general, despite the smell, because the smell can knock you out sometimes, at least I think so. I have a really sensitive nose. You can buy a cheaper marker. They dry quickly. They're probably less liable to smear. And you'll probably see fewer indications of like lines where you've gone over an area twice with a marker. I'm not going to say that you can eliminate them completely, but it's generally less visible or maybe not there at all when you use alcohol ink markers. So that's what I tell you. Prismacolors are second best. Copics are best, but there is the ink flow risk, which I feel like you should know if you're interested in buying art supplies. So that's what I tell you about markers. Following markers, paints. I tend to not use a lot of acrylic paint. That's just not the medium I prefer. It doesn't really work with the kind of stuff that I enjoy doing artwork of. But if I were going to tell you about watercolors, I really like Sakura, or Sakura, whichever the pronunciation is. It's a Japanese company. They make these little travel watercolor kits called koi, and they also have a tube of acrylic paint, acrylic tube, not acrylic, watercolor tubes of paint. I really like their stuff because it's pretty nice quality, and also I'm really fond of like watercolor pens, is what I think you'd call them. They're just very convenient, and I remember when I was attending college, I actually do have a computer science degree, but I am not a computer scientist. I am a technical writer. I did actually carry around those little kits a lot when I was in college, and I did use them. They were very nice for, they weren't messy, but I could watercolor just about anywhere. And it was really nice that I could do that. So Sakura Koi is what I would suggest if you want paint that's really nice. Now, there's people who complain about them, you know, like, oh, the color's very dull. You can if you apply them heavily enough, you can get some pretty good colors. I like them because it gives me the option to shade. I've done a lot of watercolors that are in black and white, and I can achieve some very nice shading effects by using those watercolors. So that's why I like Koi. Now, they're probably not for everybody, but that's what I enjoy using, and I think they're a pretty good quality product. You know, it's just like that. Pens. Absolutely, Faber-Castell India ink is a really good pen. If you're looking for, you know, for pen and inks, and you want something that's archivable, and you want something that has a very fine point, you're not going to get better than Micron, which is also by Sakura. Micron pens are actually something that I would say if you worked you might be familiar with them if you worked, say, like in a laboratory with important records where maybe you have a contract with the government. Because these pens are archivable, they are good for record keeping, and I have seen people use them for record keeping and not art, and that was actually probably my first introduction to microns. I had no idea how expensive these pens were at the time, but people went through them a lot at this one place where I used to work. So that's an interesting thing. These pens can have very fine tips. The latest fine tip is so small that they actually will not put out samples for you to test, because even the slightest amount of pressure on the .003 pen tip will cause it to break where it is no longer usable. It is such a delicate pen tip. It is just very tiny, very, very tiny. Like even the tip of a toothpick is probably larger than these little, I didn't make enough slabs. The tip of a toothpick is probably smaller. It's probably large. It's probably smaller than the tip of a toothpick, is what I tell you. Better to have too many than not enough. I got enough Blackstone, right? To have a few spares. Me and my crazy design ideas, right? I've got a plan. I do. It's just insane. I gotta find a warped forest. But maybe I should go mining for iron first. So after the art supplies. After paints and pens, what else would I talk about? I'm going to need another chest is what I'm going to need. I got to go cut down a tree. One last thing, because I'm pretty sure this video is getting very long, and I'm sure you're probably getting bored by now and want to go talk to someone else, unless you find my conversation just very fascinating. You might. Some people tell me it is, even though it's just me rambling. I guess paper would be what I'd talk about next. I really like Bristol paper for pen and inks, specifically their smooth Bristol, not vellum, because vellum has a rougher surface. Smooth is really nice. It tends to be a thicker paper, so it doesn't bend as easily. I remember when I was in college that I would have little 3x3 squares I'd keep in like a plastic bag, and I would store that in my purse. And whenever I had time, I would just pull out a square and start drawing on the square. and then the plastic bag will keep it safe. Those are actually the squares that I got into the one gallery that I use at. And because I'm going to try to retain my privacy, I'm going to be totally honest, I don't want people bugging me, who I am in real life, because that's just a can of worms I don't want to open. Those are the pieces that got me into the gallery in the first place. And that was when I can say safely that I wasn't even that good at doing artwork. But that's this thing that I would tell you. Bristol is really good. Smooth Bristol is extremely great for pen and inks because it provides you a nice smooth surface. It's really good paper. And you can't go wrong with good paper, is what I tell you. It's nice. So that's what I tell you for pen and inks, Bristol. So after that, I really like Strathmore for any other type of paper. I like their Stonehenge, which in mixed media, so you can get different colors. There's bluish, there's gray. You can have like a different base color. There's black, which I have trouble locating the black. I've had to go all the way to a neighboring city to get my hands on black mixed media paper. And the reason I'm fussy about this is because I do like to use paint. In general, you want to get something that is multimedia, which they'll tell you that it's good for both wet and dry media. You don't want paper, if you're using paint, for it to start shriveling up and doing weird stuff. Let's just move all the black stone and stuff in here, right? In no particular order whatsoever. So that's that, I suppose. So, I think the video is long enough for now. Thank you for watching.